Friday,
Friday.
Friday.
Friday date night. It's my date night.
Is it?
It is every Friday. You know date night, don't you?
Should we go out for dinner with the three of us?
Ronnie wants to have you out for dinner at some point, you know?
Let's do it. So, on today's show,
Today's
our
show.
favorite show,
Yes.
the topic that everyone's been looking forward to is
Gender pronouns. We're talking about gender pronouns
and
today.
how to use them without offending anyone.
Or offend people and know that you're offending people. Either way, but at least you know.
We hope not to walk away from the show being more ignorant than we are now.
That we started. And we're going to do that with one of our really favorite guests, because we basically had to find a reason to get Jack back on. So we found a reason and we said, let's discuss a topic that's not particularly comfortable. We're going to do that on
A Wonderful Chaos.
A Wonderful Chaos.
Isn't it weird? Like, I'm sitting here and sometimes I just find it weird that there's probably people on the other side that are looking at us.
Yeah.
And what are they doing? Like, are they sitting down, like chilling?
Yeah.
Are they just putting it on and then walking around the house doing
Exactly.
stuff?
Yeah. Like who's going to sit and watch an hour-long video, right? I mean, I think, in fact, the reason why we did the podcast was because someone said, Andy, basically, I don't watch your videos anyway. I just walk around the house and listen to you guys chit-chat.
Oh, I thought you wanted to do the podcast because it was more professional, Andy Shayla.
That as well. But, Jack Ori. Oh, Jack.
That was the weirdest transition.
Jack Ori. Jack, we're bringing you on to discuss a topic neither of us really wants to talk about. This is really beautiful because both.
I even thought, should I Google what it means so I don't appear stupid? And I'm like, no, let me appear stupid.
So the funny thing is that Jack got roped into this because Jack is our transgender educator. So that's what we've treated him as. Yeah. Jack is the one who's allowed us to have all the fun we want to have and learn and grow with him as he shares with us his journey, and we get to share our own understanding or our lack of understanding, which is always sweet. And the reason why I'll bring on a topic like this is because I have some judgment to this topic. And I'd like to share that because I also see I'm not the only one, but no one wants to talk about it.
You share judgment?
Well, I have ideas around this subject.
I feel confused around this subject, but I don't feel
Well,
judgment.
Let me tell you this. What I feel is that there's a lot of people judging me for if I don't decide to use a gender pronoun.
Yeah, I've had that too.
So and we've had I had, because of this show, 3 different people reach out to me independently of one another who are highly self-aware, who said, Andy, I actually have similar struggles in this area, but no one wants to talk about it because they're worried that they're going to be shamed. Because as soon as you bring forward the topic and you don't show immediate solidarity, there's a lot of backlash you can receive.
Yeah.
Right? It's like almost the mentality that you're with us or against us.
Yeah.
And I'm so opposed to that dichotomy of living that there's a challenge in this. Now, this shifted for me on one of our shows. We had Nadia on the show. Remember when we had Nadia on the show?
We had it twice. Which one?
The second show, when we talked about sexual ambiguity. And when she said something really beautiful that really touched me, is she said she uses gender pronouns because it shows solidarity. It shows that I see you and I appreciate what you're going through, and I'm showing you that I'm actually embracing who and what you're trying to create or show in the world. And that was the first time I felt like, wow, I get it, that.
Yeah.
That I felt like lovingly connected to.
Yeah, that's really beautiful.
Yeah. So that was me being enthusiastic.
But the one that really confuses me is when it's them, they.
Yeah, and that's what we'll talk to Jack about. And let's also, like, on Jack's behalf, Jack is no specialist in this field, so he's just helping us along, and maybe he's not going to even know some of the things we might ask. So with that, I think we can bring Jack on.
How does it feel?
Hey, Jack.
Hey, Andy, hey, Plebos, how are you guys?
You
Good.
you pronounced my name wrong. I don't feel respected.
Is that right?
I,
No, that's the. Don't screw with Jack. Listen, Jack is going to take you seriously. Jack, you pronounced it properly. What Bambus was doing was making a point, and I think it was really interesting, and I like it. Something I would do under different circumstances is that sometimes when one says to somebody, "Hey," they don't use the right gender pronoun, or they don't show acknowledgement of the gender, there's offense taken.
Right. Well, first of all, I think that's on the person who's feeling offended. Like, I don't go for this whole "you offended me" shit. So that's the first thing. And the other thing is there are like I also think it's on us as trans people to, or whoever, you know, or people with varying backgrounds, to realize that there's a difference between malicious and not knowing. Like, there are some people who will deliberately call someone by the wrong pronoun because they think that it's going to hurt them, or they don't think that, or they think that it's all bullshit, or whatever the reason is. So they just don't want to be respectful, and they're just like, "Oh, I don't care what you say. I'm going to call you she, or I'm going to call you he, because that's what I think you should be." And that's a totally different thing than somebody who just either doesn't know, or like they might not remember. I talk with as you know, when I coach parents of transgender kids, this comes up a lot, because a lot of times the parents will be like, "I know my child identifies as she or he or they, but I can't seem to remember it." And they get frustrated with themselves. And that's because if you've raised a child for 10, 15, 20, or in my case, 30 years, you've got this habit of calling them by a name and a pronoun that's not going to just go away overnight. So, you know, and even with strangers, when I was first transitioning, I would go into the grocery store and someone would say, "Here you go, ma'am," or "How are you doing, ma'am," or whatever. And I tried not to get frustrated about it, because it is frustrating for me as a trans person to be like, "Hello, I'm not a ma'am," especially when I look like this. but but if somebody did that, I would just try to be polite about it, like, "Hey, can you call me sir?" Or, "Actually, it's not ma'am," or whatever. And sometimes it would get awkward, because they would get like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I really didn't mean that. I didn't realize, blah, blah, blah." And it's like, that's not necessary either.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't that you offended. I just wanted to correct for future. Yeah.
so it has to do with intention, and it has to do with context.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I do want to say, I think there is too much of a hair trigger on a lot of people, where they take everything as offensive.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that I've been thinking about recently too, is I think that being exposed to a lot of people from different backgrounds is actually a privilege in and of itself. That there are people who grow up in these tiny little communities where everybody is the same. And it's asking a lot for someone who, for example, grew up in a tiny little, what we call Bible Belt towns here in the US, where everybody is extremely religious Christian and has certain beliefs. It's asking a lot of them for them to even know that there's any such thing, or to even know that it's not a sin or whatever it is, because you can't expect somebody who's never been exposed to it to have the same attitudes as somebody who's grown up around it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, Jack, where I experience resistance is, I don't have an issue using the pronouns. It's more if I feel the person has a strong identity and I can feel that it's volatile. There's a part of me that wants to bring that to the light, but in a loving way, and especially if it's a friendship, that we can talk about this. Like, there's no space for human error. Like, if someone calls me a dickhead, I've pretty much been trained to say, I can see why you would say that.
Right. And that's where it does get difficult, because again, that's where I differ from most people, is I feel like if someone is going to be offended, that's on them. not on me for what I said, unless I deliberately was trying to provoke that reaction,
Yeah.
And even then, it's still their responsibility to decide how they're going to react to it. So, and I agree also that I think that all this volatility just shuts down conversations because, we can't talk because everyone's so afraid of saying the wrong thing and so afraid of what other people are going to say and so afraid that they don't want to be seen as transphobic or homophobic or racist or ableist or any of the other ists.
Yeah. Even bringing this topic on, Jack, I was thinking, oh God, because I'm going to be authentic about my experience here. Right. And I also know there'll be viewers who look through the lens of a very strong, you're either with us or against us. Right. And that feels very vulnerable because I'm like, I also don't want to pretend like this isn't an area that I also have found challenges.
Yeah. Right, exactly. And that's how I've always felt too, is, one of the things that people say is it's not my responsibility to educate people who don't know just because I'm trans or whatever. And I get that you don't want to be spending all day talking about it. And not that I don't want to talk about it on this podcast, obviously, or I wouldn't have accepted. But if I go to a family party, there was one time when I went to a family party and 3 people in a row asked me something about some transgender thing they heard in the news. And it was kind of like, can we talk about something else? So I get that. But I feel like if people can't ask questions, if people can't say, hey, I don't get this, and I know that you've dealt with it because you're transgender, can you explain it to me? How is anyone ever going to learn, and how are things ever going to get better? Because you can't have it both ways. You can't have it, it's not my job to educate you, and also be like, why can't people be accepting?
Yeah.
It's like that. It goes back to that whole thing that people aren't going to automatically know everything, especially if you haven't been raised in a community where there are lots and lots of trans people or people with diverse identities. You're just not going to know. And how can you learn? And that's where it becomes a thing where I feel like in some ways it becomes censorship, where if you say certain things, instead of being like, well, I disagree and here's my experience, people are just like, you're prejudiced, goodbye. Yeah. And I feel like it becomes a censorship thing where people are like, I don't want to be seen as that, so I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah. Can we wind back a little bit to the beginning? Because we also are a bit ignorant on the subject. Like, honestly, I don't even know. I understand that from our last talk, if people want to look back, we discussed people, they have a gender identity and then they have a sexual identity. And those two may not be what we associate today with what, if you're a male, then you're homosexual and you have sex with females. Like that whole thing we've already dispelled in our last show together. So my question to you is, where did gender pronouns come into this as we started to, do you know at all when the inception of the first person who says I'm using gender pronouns was and why that came about?
I don't really know the history. I know that people now it's become very common to ask what's your preferred pronoun, what are your pronouns, which I think is something that's really great and really helpful. And I know that there's pushback about that from conservatives who try to start these culture wars and be like, that's not important. Why does anyone care about that? Look at these stupid liberals. Ha ha ha.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they say.
But I don't really know where it began because I don't know. I probably don't know as much about transgender history as I really should as a transgender.
Yes, you are the ambassador and you do not know. But by the way, why not just he? Why do you need he, him, his? Like, why couldn't you just say he?
I think people do just to be clear, because I think it mostly comes up with non-binary pronouns. Like, a lot of people do use they as a non-binary, they, theirs as a non-binary pronoun. Now, some people also use non-standard pronouns, like Z, and I think it's Zim. I don't remember all of them. But
what would a non-standard pronoun be used for? What is that trying to indicate?
So like Z would be like to indicate that the person is some mixture of male or female, or is not male or female, or is some other type of gender identity. So they might use a word like that, or they might just use they, theirs. But it would look kind of weird if people were like, I go by he, and the next person is like, I go by Z and Zim. Then that doesn't match. So I think that everybody does it, just to be clear. And you could always have someone who's a little bit of an out of the box thinker who's like, I go by he when you're talking about me that way. But if you want to talk about me instead of him, say her, or some weird thing like that. I guess that could happen with somebody. So they just want to make it people just want to make it absolutely clear. These are all my pronouns, so that you don't have to have so that if someone is confused, they don't have to be like, okay, what do I use for grammatically for this? I'm lost.
Yeah. I was lucky enough to have a nephew, and the nephew has transitioned, right, to nephew. And as I was, graduating, going through that process together, it was really interesting, because what I found is that I love them independently of whatever the hell they were going through identified. And to be honest, I didn't even really care about the identity. Like, it's like, I love you, whatever. And the more I have to think about the identity, the more fucking confused I get. So let me just love you for who you are. And it was kind of funny, because what I saw in my relationship with him was that we were really close, but I didn't think about gender pronoun. Like I said, I can't think about this shit. I'm with you. I can't, like, my brain, if I have to juggle what I'm going to call you, I'm no longer with you. And he got it. So in some funny way, you said your intentions are clear. So my intentions were so clear from his side that he actually saw that there was a respect that it didn't matter. Gender was no longer an issue in that relationship. And that's what I want in all my relationships, if it's possible. So I often find going to gender is like 5 levels below where I want to be with any individual, which is transpersonal, like beyond the idea that we are one thing or another thing, that kind of feeling.
Right. I mean, there are different levels to it, because I do think, like, basically, I'm the same person I was in a lot of ways. I'm not female, obviously, even though I was raised female. And when you transition, you do change certain other aspects about your life, like anything unhealthy you were doing in the service of trying to be something you're not. You need to get rid of, and it can change your relationships with people, because now you're showing up as your authentic self, and it is important to acknowledge that from the sense of, this is who I am, and I don't want people to just see me as an amorphous whatever. But at the same time, there is that deeper level of, I respect you as a person, I care about you as a person, I want to know who you are, not just your gender. Like, sometimes people will send me things about transgender issues that they expect I can be riled up about, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, I don't care about this. So it's not always, being transgender is not this amorphous, monolithic, I'm transgender, so I care about every single issue that has the word transgender in it, or I feel this or I feel that. But it is also kind of like, how people of color don't want people to be like, I'm colorblind, I don't see color, because they want to be seen as having that identity, but not not in a bigoted way. Kind of thing.
I think that the thing is that
similar sort of thing.
Yeah, we discussed it as well a lot on the show, is that on one degree, when you say you're colorblind, then you're not actually reflecting on where is it that you are reacting differently because of someone's color. So in a way, you shut your brain down to reflection, which is the sad, better to say that I'm a racist, I just haven't figured out where yet, than to say I'm not racist, and then now you have to validate that reality just by trying to, because then you don't get to reflect and learn,
Right. And I think it's the same thing for transgender people. For me, it gets a little bit confusing, because there are some transgender people who are like, I've transitioned, and I hear this a lot more from trans women than trans men, that I've known from trans women who've been like, I'm not trans woman anymore, I'm just a woman, and they don't want that identity. And that's perfectly respectful and valid for someone to feel that, and you always want to identify someone the way they want to be identified and not as your own. But for me, I'm like, I'm open about being trans. I'm not going to hide my childhood pictures of me as a girl.
Yeah, I saw you post that. I thought that was really sweet, you know? And it fucked with my brain now because I know you as Jack, and now you're pushing me back in a direction and I'm like, who the hell is that other thing?
Right. But there are some trans people who would be like, my life before I transition doesn't exist. I don't want anyone to know. You know.
Yeah, well, that was one thing I learned on the last show. You know, because we were discussing the rules of not to ask questions, not to ask, which was what was your name beforehand,
Right.
and then when you said, and you were okay with it, of course, because that's who you are. But you said that was what was termed dead naming, or I think that was the term which I'd never heard that before, and it fascinated me because it makes sense. That person's no longer alive; they've transitioned. So in a way, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So. But yeah, so, you know, and I feel like for me, I like being seen as a trans person as long as it's not some guy on the street pointing at my chest, being like, hey, you know, the guys on the street sometimes say.
Yeah, in fact, unfortunately, those people still exist. So we have Iris Offer, who says she started following you on Instagram after your first show, and that's wonderful. Awesome. Iris, I got to tell you, I'm loving the photo of you. Bombos, you didn't take that photo, did you?
No.
Okay, Iris, we're loving the photo. I think the main struggle with pronouns is the identity politics. Some people believe that everyone can define their identity, and some believe it's not something that can be defined just like that. Yeah.
I definitely want to say a few things about that, because one of the things that I've realized when I talk with friends who are more conservative, a lot of times their resistance to it is that for some reason, there's this idea that they have that if I can identify as male, even though I was assigned female at birth, that means that they're not allowed to identify as the gender they were born as, which is...
You have to slow that down. You have to say that again, because I had to do like gymnastics. When we speak, oftentimes I have to do gymnastics in my head. So say that sentence again slower for me.
Yeah, so sometimes, like, a lot of people who I've spoken to who are more conservative about this will say something like, I'm allowed, like, they're cisgender, right? So they're a cisgender man or cisgender woman. And they're like, well, if you can change your gender, that means I'm not allowed to identify as the gender I was born as.
Like, really? They say that?
Have this idea that it means that everyone has to identify as transgender, which is not true, obviously.
That's the weirdest thing.
And sometimes clearing that up clears up the resistance. So it's not, you know, and I think that's one issue that's related to that, is sometimes people think, are you going to look down on me because I'm not transgender, because I identify as male when I was born male, or I identify as female when I was born female? And then we also get into the whole thing of it's much more abstract, right, than just than the biological, okay, this person has certain genitals or has certain chromosomes, so they're male, and this one is female. But it's a lot more abstract if I say, okay, I was born female, I was assigned female at birth, but I felt like I was a boy my whole life. That's not something tangible. So people can sometimes get into this thing of, okay, well, what stops someone from just saying that to get some sort of advantage over someone else? Because there's no way to prove it.
Yeah. You also see in the Olympics now, the first transgender is competing in the next Olympics.
Yeah, the first transgender woman. And that's something that here in the United States, we're having a lot of issues with Republican legislatures trying to make laws saying transgender kids can't play on the sports team with cisgender kids of the same gender. And they couch it in these arguments about, well, biologically it'll be an advantage if they're on hormones, blah, 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 which, first of all, if we're talking about kids, like, is not even an issue. And secondly, there's still biological differences between cis people on the same team, right? There are women who are stronger or faster than other cis women. There are cis men who are stronger or faster than other cis men. So it's really kind of a specious argument, but that seems to be where the debate is at a lot right now.
By the way, I want to correct something that I said. On the last show, I said the same thing I said now, and you corrected me on that show. And I said transgender, and I didn't say male or female.
Right.
Because I didn't know whether it was a male or a female, just to get that clear. But just for those listening, where Jack corrected me and I caught myself this time was I said, there's a transgender that's participating in the Olympics. And you said, actually, at that show, Andy, labeling that as transgender would be politically incorrect.
Because you need to be male or female.
Yeah, because you need to label male or female.
Yeah.
And if you don't know.
And I was trying to cover up because I didn't know. So I just said transgender.
Yeah, if you don't know, you can always say transgender person.
Okay. But at least I want to acknowledge that there's a RAM in there that's processing and trying to take responsibility where it can. It doesn't always work, but it endeavors to. Yeah.
Well, so far, I'm not with the program.
Yeah.
Like I can understand, but it means I see, just because of the way I am eternally, I have to move away from the connection and go into my head and really be alert with everything that I'm going to say, as opposed to staying in connection with the person.
Right.
I'm not very comfortable living in my head. I like living more in my body and being in connection with the emotions that are present, with the feelings. So it's definitely a struggle for me.
Right. Yeah, I can definitely understand that, and I think that's something that happens when something is new. Like if you think about when you first were learning to drive a car, like every little thing was like, okay, now I have to put it in this gear. Now I have to turn the wheel this way. And then eventually it becomes automatic, because otherwise no one will be able to drive, right? Because they would be having to think of every little thing. And I think it's the same sort of thing where when it's new and you're first learning about it, you're consciously thinking, okay, I have to ask this person what their pronouns are. I want to make sure that I say a noun after the adjective. I don't want to forget that. I don't want to say the wrong pronoun for them. I need to remember their name. I need to remember that they might not want people to know. They might want people to know. All this stuff is going through your head. And on top of that, it's and so to go back to the driving analogy, it's also like when you're first learning to drive, you also have in the back of your head, if I make a mistake, I'm going to crash into something and kill myself. And it's the same sort of thing where you're like, if I make a mistake, this person's going to think I'm horrible and something terrible is going to happen. Yeah. And so eventually I think it does become more automatic. But in the meantime, I think it's also helpful to remember that you are learning, and give yourself that break and not be like, and I think there are times where you can focus more on what they're saying too. Like if you're at a party and someone's transgender and you're talking to that person, they're telling you about their job or some funny story or something, that's the time where you can kind of relax and you don't have to be thinking, oh, okay, this person is a woman, not a man, because that has nothing to do with what you're talking about. And then, also as you're practicing, if something comes up where you make a mistake, it's best just to try to correct yourself as best as possible and move on. That happens to me sometimes, even now, like with some of my non-binary friends. Sometimes when I'm talking to other people, I might say he or she and then be like, oh, they,
Yeah.
So you can.
Did they give you a hard time? Did they?
No.
Oh, good. I would love it if they gave you a hard time, after all you've had to go through.
I love the car analogy.
Yeah.
But, a car you're going to practice every day. You're sitting in it every day and you're learning. And with this specific subject, it's not something that I'm encountering on a daily basis. It's like sparse. Unless I go out with a gay friend and he takes me to a scene where I get to interact and dance. But, if you're dancing, you're not talking. So in a way, it's very rare. So I would actually need to buy a book, study the book, so when I'm prepared for everything.
Can
Right.
I field this one, Jack, for a
Sure.
moment?
Sure.
So I think what Jack is speaking to is a phenomena that I would say is there's like society goes through social, call it social understanding that evolves over time.
Yeah.
And the first kind of introduction of it, it's so foreign that nobody takes it even seriously at first. It's like, oh God, like what he mentioned, liberals, it'll be discounted by conservatives. So it's just discounted. And then it'll start showing up on TV. It'll be in a show that you saw. It'll be in a training that you did.
Or in a form that you have to fill out.
Or in a form you fill out. So all of a sudden, on this very subtle level, it gets to be more and more part of the vernacular, part of how we begin to see or feel comfortable. It'll be, if you look at TV shows nowadays, there's almost always a transgender character in the show. And in a way, there's this evolution of, wow, we begin to see it becomes normalized, but it becomes so normalized we don't even see it happening as it's happening because it's so gradual that it just happens.
Why am I smiling?
I don't know.
I don't watch any shows.
Yeah, he's not pop culture. But this is something that, I mean, I went to the Glisten Awards 2 years back in New York. It was really sweet, and I was there. And what I found very fascinating that I learned was that in the 80s, homosexuality of any sort, because we weren't at LGBTQ by then. At that point, we were at, oh, there are these people that like to have sex with other people that are of the same gender. Let's not. And then they brought on gay characters on TV, which was revolutionary at that time but the character that everyone found acceptable at that time was the white camp male. So the white camp male became the thing that everyone said, oh, we can allow that. Right? It's like, that's the acceptable gay person for us at this zeitgeist. And then all of a sudden in time, it became so normalized that at some point we just said they didn't need to be camp anymore. They could just be normal characters. But at first we needed to kind of bring them in a way that the society would allow it to come in, because if you brought it in any other way, they'd start to react violently because of whatever their prejudices were. So I think in a way there are these waves that I've seen. Now it's funny. I had a weird experience because now even in the LGBT community, I've experienced backlash towards the white camp male saying we're not white camp males. We're actually so diverse, they're not representing us in film.
Right. Yeah.
So that's been my experience.
The stereotypes sort of start to come in, and that could create its own problems. But yeah, that is definitely how it begins. I remember back in the 90s when Ellen DeGeneres came out as gay, and I think Roseanne had a gay kiss on her show, and it was scandalous. Oh my God, women are kissing.
Yeah.
And now it's like nothing, and I think that is starting to happen, and now the debate is about, should cisgender actors be playing transgender characters, or should we be having actual transgender people playing those roles? If it be on TV, even though you do get viewers who are like, oh my God, I don't like this. Why are they doing this? There's still that kind of backlash can happen too.
I want to check in because I went into a narrative, but I didn't check in with Bambos afterwards. Does the way I described it, does it resonate with you?
Yeah, I can see that what you're saying is it will gradually enter the way we live, and it becomes a norm.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's the reason why,
Andy, you could have just said that.
I think that does become one of the reasons why it does get why people do ask for pronouns or do share their pronouns, whether they're transgender or cisgender. Like, there were a lot of people during this last election that were making a big deal out of, why does Elizabeth Warren have on her Twitter that her pronouns are she, her, hers, when she's not transgender? And some people, mostly conservatives who didn't like it, were saying, oh, she's just trying to pander to those people. But what it's actually doing is trying to normalize it and be like, you shouldn't assume anyone's pronouns, you know. So that
Sorry,
it's not just
I'm
something you
confused
ask
now.
when you think someone's transgender.
Because I've seen more straight people say him,
He, him, his.
his, and the same for women. So now I'm confused. It's only people of transgender that use the pronouns.
No, no, not really. What it is it's only people who are transgender whose pronouns won't match usually what they were born as, or they're more likely to not look like their pronouns. Like if I were a transgender woman rather a transgender man, and I looked like this, but I was at the beginning of my transition, and or for whatever reason I just was not able to look like what society expects a woman to look like, and I might put on my profile she, her, hers, because I would want people to know, hey, even though I look male, I'm female, or vice versa. And but then when somebody who's not transgender, like Elizabeth Warren or whoever else, put that on their profile, it's a way of saying, hey, I support this too, just because I look female, I am female, but I'm just letting you know that's the case. You letting you know that it could have been just as easily that I identify as male.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I never realized that showing support for it could actually work as a backlash. Isn't that ironic when you think about it, that your intention is to show love and support for a group, and because there's an idea that you're not one of us, that you're not allowed to show love and support.
Right. And then it goes back to that whole conversation we were having before about, people getting so easily offended and being like, oh, you're this, so you shouldn't say that, or,
Yeah.
I think this is where we've gone too far in that direction, because it is not, I don't like the idea of you can only have certain ideas or express certain things or do certain things if you are a member of that group, which sort of goes contrary to the whole idea of transgender people's identities being valid, because I was assigned female at birth. So it's okay for me as a transgender person to use male pronouns, but it's not okay for a female person who was assigned female at birth to use their pronouns. That's sort of contradictory.
Yeah. Well, I think what I've noticed, and so we're talking about the transgender movement now, but if we took transgender, just move that out to the side and just called it identity, because identity is what most people have to go through in their lives independent of their gender. It's just a different identity.
Right.
Like the hardest thing is I know, like, the identity that I picked growing up and in those formative years was track athlete. Like that's what, and I was so identified with that for me, it was the thing that I held dearest to me. I wanted to be seen as that. But it was kind of a healthy by societal standards, because that's what society said. That identity is something that, now it's interesting, those formative years, if you choose a gender as the thing that you really are holding on to identify with, that's less accepted by society, then to some degree, there's a degree to which you also feel victimized by society because they're not accepting you for who you are.
Right, exactly. And a couple of points about that too. One, that everyone has a gender identity, and I think that's what's behind everybody putting their pronouns on their profiles and things, because people tend to think, oh, transgender people have a gender identity, but cisgender people do also. Like, if you are assigned male at birth and you identify as male, that's still a gender identity, even though it's not at odds with what society thinks you are.
Exactly.
So that's important to recognize also, that we all have one, and we all definitely have these other identities that we hold on to that are really important to us, and that we can change. And the other thing is too, that also goes to the issue of societal expectations and family expectations. Like, if you grew up in a family where everybody was athletic and that was very important, and you as a child might be like, I'm going to join this team because my family is athletic, it's very important to me to be athletic too, even if you're clumsy and not very good at the sport. And that's kind of what it's like to be transgender, because your family is like, okay, you're a girl or you're a boy, and they're going to encourage you to do whatever being that identity means to them.
Yeah.
But it might not necessarily fit you.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. I love the analogy. We have some people that are chiming in, so it's nice to bring them on. Bolalong in South Africa just wants to say, my language does not have gender-specific pronouns. So we're just going to call you it for the moment, Bolalong. And Ron Vargas, he's transhuman, and we had him on a show because he has a show called Living Without Filters, because he really does not have any filters on his speaking. So I don't know how we categorize him, but he's a work of art. Chris Garrell.
A work of art is good.
Is a work of art. Chris Garrell, who you might know Chris from his very famous TEDx talk, or TED talk, not a TEDx talk. Or is it TEDx? I don't know what the difference is. A TEDx talk where he spoke about the emotional quotient. What was it called? The
periodic table.
The periodic table for emotions.
Oh,
and
cool.
he writes,
genius.
He says, there's a level of respect I offer my human siblings who have differing pronouns, or especially with transition persons, because they have had to ask questions that I've never had to deal with. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's an important point.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because I also do think that one of the reasons it's hard sometimes for people to wrap their head around it is because if you haven't asked yourself, well, people say I'm a girl, but I don't feel that way. It's hard to imagine that experience, because it's so ingrained in us to have whatever our gender is.
Yeah.
It's just a part of you that everyone refers to you from early childhood on. Even in preschool, sometimes they have gendered bathrooms where they're like, no, you line up here because this is where the girls go.
Yeah.
And so it's something that's so ingrained in people that if you haven't dealt with the question of, this doesn't feel right, I think I might be a boy, or I think I might not be a boy or a girl, or I don't know what I am.
Yeah.
That's
and then you
really
need to give yourself a place.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really hard to empathize with. I mean, you can't empathize to a degree. You can be like, okay, I understand what you're saying intellectually, that you felt that way, but you don't have that frame of reference, except maybe by analogies, by like what you said about, I felt it was really important that I was an athlete.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. You have to relativize it to something which is not at all the same, but something that at least you can identify with, which gets to the point which I hear in this, which I think is true for everything, which is, to what degree can we create or experience compassion for experiences that we have not had ourselves?
Right, exactly. And I think we can have compassion, we can have empathy, we can't know exactly what it's like for that person, but we can hear what they are saying, and we can imagine or relate it to something in our lives that has happened. And the other point I want to make too is that, and I was posting about this on my Facebook last night, I don't know if you saw where I had put agree or disagree, even though there are some issues that are trans specific, everybody goes through major transformations in their life. And because that's one of the things that I've been thinking about recently, because I want to expand to helping people with other kinds of transformations other than only helping parents of transgender people. Is that, for example, Reinventing Hannah, my book.
I was going to say, we're going to get to Reinventing Hannah.
Yeah.
I love how much you love promoting Reinventing Hannah. It gives me so much joy to see when you put it on your page. You're like, I'm owning this. I'm so proud of this damn thing. It's so fun to watch you do this.
Awesome. Yay. Yeah. So, so as Reinventing Hannah is not transgender. And sometimes people assume it's about a transgender character because it's about reinvention. And they're like, oh, you should have a class about transitioning and sell a book with that. I was like, no, she's not transgender, so that doesn't apply. But she goes through this major transformation after she experiences this traumatic experience where she's roofied at a party and she wakes up to discover that she's been sexually assaulted and she doesn't remember it and all that. She goes through a transformation of transformative experience where she decides, I don't want to be this super quiet girl who never rocks the boat anymore. I want to be who I really am. I want to stand up for myself. I want to date the guy that I love, even though my friends and my family won't approve of him because he used to smoke pot and he did things that they would think are bad and that kind of thing. And she goes through that whole same experience of her friends being like, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you being the way you were before? And having to navigate that and having to push herself to be who she really is as opposed to who she's used to being. So I feel like, no, she's not transgender. It's not a gender transition, but that's still a major life transformation where some of the same things happen so people can relate to it in a similar way. And so I do kind of feel like all major transformations have these elements in common, even though it might not be a gender thing. Most people could probably think of a time in their life where they were like, I can't stand this anymore. I have to make this change. And other people might not have approved of it. And it's something you see a lot, especially too, with people who have struggle with substance use, right? When you decide, I'm not going to drink or I'm not going to do drugs anymore, that's like a major change where you might have surrounded yourself with friends who were doing those things, who now you have to explain, I'm not drinking anymore, and you have to deal with people pressuring you to be the way you were, and you might have had other unhealthy habits, and now you might be going for a different kind of job. Maybe you were in some high-stress job that wasn't good for you, that was making you want to just drink when you get home. And so you have to go through that transformation. And sometimes the people around you are like, you're no fun anymore. You're not partying anymore. Or why did you quit that job? It was so much money, And so those kinds of things, again, not gender identity, but...
Well, I wouldn't say, it's interesting because I wouldn't necessarily say they're not transgender identity or any identity.
Right.
Because we had a really nice show as well where it was called Outgrowing Friends. And I mean, the whole focus of that show was that as we evolve, we have people around us that have certain expectations of us, and they can't change or adapt to the new us.
Right.
So in a way,
they'll still treat you as the old way.
And in fact, they almost push you in the old way because that's how they're comfortable knowing and having an idea of who you are.
Right, exactly. And that's one of the things that Hannah navigates in the book is going from her friends being like, you've changed, what's wrong with you? This isn't healthy. And then, they try to blame her new boyfriend and be like, oh, well, you must be wearing these clothes and doing these things because you're with him. When it's like, no, that's not the reason. She's with him because she's doing these things, not the other way around. So, and I do think that's something that all major transformations have in common, that whether it is a gender identity or changing a habit, like an unhealthy habit or lifestyle, like alcohol abuse or something like that, or gender identity, or getting into habits of being more assertive, or whatever it is. Whatever it is that you're decided, this is the new me, this is how I'm going to be more authentic, more true to myself. There's always going to be that moment where you're at this crossroads where you're like, if I do this, I could lose this person over here who's very important to me.
Yeah.
You have to make that decision. Am I going to continue on this path, or am I going to go back to the way I was because I don't want to lose that person?
Yeah, that's always one of the hardest things in life, is when you've decided to do something and then you're not doing it because you're trying to save someone else's discomfort. That's one of those moments. There's several moments like that, of course.
Right. And that's one of the things too, is that if the person is really a true friend or whatever, they will hopefully come around eventually.
That's what you hope.
You're happier. And I saw that with my gender identity. When I was first transitioning, a lot of my family was kind of skeptical of, not that they were supportive, but they were kind of like, is this real? Where did this come from?
Yeah.
But then they would see that I was a lot happier.
Yeah.
Wow.
Chris Garrell again coming in strong with a second question. The frustrating thing I find is that some people can't simply accept what another person identifies as. Who gave them authority over other personal identity?
Exactly. And I think that's a really great point. And I think that point also goes back to us saying about some people are afraid that if you have this identity, it means they can't have their more traditional identity.
Yeah.
And I think that's where that's coming from, where they're like, oh my God, there are trans people using the same bathroom as me. That means that I'm not allowed to be cisgender. Or
Yeah.
not, it's not a competition. It's not everyone has to be one way or the other way. It's just, and I think it also goes to that not whole difficulty understanding it. Like, if you haven't experienced it, but you can empathize because you've thought about a situation in your own life, then you're going to be like, okay, this person needs this to do this, to be happy. But if you don't understand it and you're like, this makes no sense, this person is saying they're a boy, they're just crazy.
Yeah.
Then you're going to be like, why are they, I'm going to try, you know. And I think for a lot of those people, they think that they're doing the right thing and they think that they're being helpful by telling you, no, you can't have this identity.
Yeah.
Like, I remember years ago being at International Festival in Raleigh, which is this festival they have every year where you can try food from different cultures and they have dances from different cultures and stuff. And I was with a friend who, at the time, who was also transgender. And we sat down and these people from our old place of worship saw us. And this girl came over to say hello. And the first thing she said to my friend was, I feel so sad that you're no longer following God's path. You know, God meant you to be a man, blah, blah, blah. And she literally, I don't think she understood that her words were hurtful. Like, I think she thought that she was being loving and she really thought that she was being helpful and being like, this is not good for you. You shouldn't do this. When even though the opposite.
Like I when you're talking, there's the experiment that Jane Elliott did, right? The brown-eyed, blue-eyed, and it was only through that experience people who are white could experience what it's like to be a black person in this society. And they only had it for the time of the Oprah Winfrey show, and black people live it their whole life.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing too, is like people who don't live it, that experience, they can be like, okay, I don't want to hear about this anymore. I'm tired of this. Why do we always have to talk about this? And well,
and that question is exactly the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's like you can't turn it off if you're living it. You can't just not talk about it.
Bolalong writes as well. Not exactly sure what he's writing.
It's because you called him an it.
Oh, we do, however, differentiate between humans and animals and objects. It is for objects and animals.
Very clear.
Oh, because I called him an it.
Yeah. I mean,
that was his comeback.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that they is so popular, besides being for non-binary people, that in general, it's a way to be gender neutral without differentiating someone as non-human, because unfortunately there are transphobic people who will call transgender people it more seriously. Obviously that's not what you were doing.
No, obviously not, but I'm going to try to provoke Bolalong every way I can. I've got a question about I don't know. So I'm writing the third book, right? It's not about reinventing Hannah. Unfortunately, Bambos, he would rise up the book if he could, but we don't have it. And I got back the first draft from the editor who edited my first two chapters. And in his edits, he changed every time I put they, he put he or she, right? Which is proper grammar. So no, follow me here. So I write they in the, at least I assume it's proper grammar. I'm not the best in grammar. I just made the assumption and he writes back he or she to replace the theys that I have in my text. And I laugh because I see myself triggered by the fact that it's he or she. And also it's just harder to read, I find. I don't like he or she, it's just they, And the funny thing is you had a point to make and I didn't, I just finished my point. So when I said that, you reacted. What did you react to?
My reaction was that it's so annoying to me when people do that. because
But what would you write then? What would you write?
I would write they.
Okay, because I would write they as well, but he's writing he or she.
Yeah, so that's first of all, that's an older way of doing things, and I think it's very awkward.
I find it awkward as well, but I need another person so that I can say back to him without feeling, because he's done 100 of these things. I've done 3. I'm gonna defer to his authority in a way. I don't want to say, hey, dude, the they thing. Why did you take all my theys out?
Right. I mean, you do have to make sure you're using the correct verb, like you would say they are, not they is. Like, I was so annoyed the other week because I think, I watched the soap opera Days of Our Lives, and I think they were trying to be trans supportive because they had this whole dialogue. They have a character right now who's bisexual, and the character's mother was talking about things change, and she was like, and she said something about they, and one of the younger characters was like, yeah, my grandmother says grammar changes. Now people say they is, and it's correct. I was like, no, they don't. I put that on my blog. I was like, thanks for trying, but that's not correct.
You missed the mark. They is. Oh, they is isn't. You can't say they is.
No, it's they are.
They are.
No, Bambos, because don't look at me crazy. This is a fair question. No, because listen, they is, if it's a single individual who identifies as a they, then they is would appear to be correct.
Right, it would appear to be correct, which is why they made that mistake on the show, because they were just thinking that way, but that's not how it works, because still, the grammar is still they are. It's just that you're using they because this person, not that they identify as more than one person, but they
identify as not a single of those people.
Right.
So I don't know. Somehow my brain still sees it as they is.
I get it.
Right, which it's logical to think that way. Like, I wasn't like mad that they did that, and I just kind of like, please look it up if you're going to put it on TV.
Exactly. I find it a fascinating point, by the way, actually. Because there are implications for the meaning of words, and if you're going to use they as a single individual, that would have a grammar implication if you were going to use it in that context.
Right. And then
this is the thing that Bambos and I were talking about earlier, because now your brain is juggling with all of these things that it can't quite answer, and it doesn't even know if it's speaking correctly.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where
we brought you on thinking that you're an authority.
He is. He says they are, regardless of the context.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and and I think it's one of those things where we do learn by doing, right? Like, you can't just wait until everything's perfect to try, or otherwise you'll never say anything to anybody. So. And I do think that's one of those things where it's important to have that space to be able to make mistakes, because it goes back to what we said at the beginning, that if people have the attitude of, oh my God, you said they is instead of they are, you're out. Yeah. People just censor themselves.
I have an interesting one that comes again from Chris Carell. He's active today. He says, and then we have the biblical literalist who quote me, and God made them male and female.
Right, which I always find is interesting, because that could be interpreted either way, right? That could be interpreted the way the literalists interpret, or it could be interpreted the other way, that God made people non-binary.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I never read that. Let's slow that down for a moment. It's quite funny. I didn't see that till just now. He made them male and female.
That could be either way, because it doesn't say he made them two.
You're right. That is so funny. So either way, you could say, yes, you're right. It's in the Bible. He did make us male and female. That's the point. Wow, that's fascinating. Okay. Yeah.
You go, Jack.
And then Chris, he loves that. I think you surprised us all with that one.
And I'm sure Chris is going to use it with his biblical friends.
Yes. Chris is very active. he also is he's someone who we also have had on the show a few times. He's
Oh, cool.
has cancer at the moment, so he's going through his own journey, and he's done several shows with us on many different topics. So
Yeah.
if anyone hasn't seen them, then I suggest Dark Night of the Soul is one of
Our favorite.
our favorites. No one else seems to like going through the Dark Night of the Soul with us, but we really enjoyed that show.
And emotional intelligence.
Yes, and he has a new book coming out as well.
Oh, cool.
I gotta remember the name, The Honey. He's gonna write it for me. I'm not good with my memory, but it's an exceptional book, and in reading his book, it made me laugh at how clear we are so aligned in life that we might as well not even have a discussion, because basically it's talking to yourself.
I
Some
love
people
that.
in life, you're just like, okay, I know what you're gonna say, because we both grew up in this under the same, call it, lineage of personal development. Which takes me to one last thing that I would love to just to say. We're over our hour already, but it's a point I haven't yet made, and I slightly made it. Typhoon Honey, just for those. Typhoon Honey, The Only Way Out Is Through. Right, that's the book that Chris Carell is coming out with. Not yet, but I read it and it was really great. The one thing that I struggle with, not only with the transgender movement, because it's independent of that. My whole life is about preparing to die. I want to die in peace, being in connection with being here with you now. And I see that anything that takes me away from that peace is something I can make space for, but it's not where I want to spend my time.
Right.
So when an individual, any individual, come and talk to me about a belief that you have, come and talk to me about a way you want to be identified, I'll make space for it, of course, because I don't want to hurt another person. But if I'm honest with myself, I want everyone to see through this illusionary aspect of the world, this idea that we're separate to begin with. The fact that we've been socialized in so many ways we're not aware of, that even the idea we have to fight against something is still socialized. Meaning, I want to see that the gender is something that we've come to kind of realize, not only through the fact that we observe it, but we've socialized. We've given the child a gun, and we've given the female child a Barbie doll. Like, all of that socialization has gone on to the point where if I have my way, we see through that in ourselves, and then we just see that we're all the same. We all came from magic dust. We're all going back to magic dust. So, like, let's love while we're here sharing this sort of painful journey together. And that's where it surpasses these topics, which makes it sometimes hard for me to discuss these topics, because I say, I'm beyond this.
Right. Yeah, I totally get that. And it is tough because there is all this socialization kind of nonsense, and that changes over time too, right? Like, I don't know if you've seen, like, it circulates on Facebook every once in a while, this picture of FDR when he was a little boy. And back then they dressed boys like girls, and he was wearing this dress and has long hair, and they're like, this was what the norm was then. So what's the big deal now?
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to realize some of it is societal trappings. And I think that's the whole thing with the transgender movement also, is that people have a hard time wrapping their mind around sometimes. It's not just about conforming to expectations for a particular gender, because I know trans guys who have transitioned, they've got on testosterone, they've got a beard like me, and they love putting on makeup and eyeliner and wearing dresses. And they're like, just because I'm a guy doesn't mean that I have to stop doing that,
Yeah.
And then there are transgender men who don't go on hormones because they want to have babies, but they identify as male, but they want to have that whole pregnancy experience. And that's something I did research on when I was in graduate school, how that plays out, because that's something that sometimes people have a hard time wrapping their mind around, because our society says mothers give birth, not fathers.
Yeah.
And the research that I did found that there were a lot of instances where when the person made the appointment for prenatal care, they would get misgendered because the prenatal person in their mind is like women have babies.
Yeah.
And I've experienced that to a degree too, even though I don't have that issue. When I've had to have mammograms because I'm over 40, to check for breast cancer, and the staff were perfectly fine with me being male and respecting my gender pronouns and everything. But then they give you the survey at the end to fill out, and it says, how likely are you to recommend our service to other women? and the letter that comes back says, thank you for taking care of your female health.
Yeah.
Your results came back, you're fine.
Yeah.
It's the things that people don't think about.
Yeah. And it wasn't anything malicious. Again, it was just unconscious that they have this idea. Women, which is, in the case of mammograms, is doubly sad because there are cis men who get breast cancer.
Yeah.
Also. So,
wow.
But and that's unfortunately something that sometimes stops some trans people from getting the healthcare they need. Not even talking about access to healthcare, whether you can pay for it in America, which is a whole other can of worms.
I know.
But sometimes a trans guy like me might be like, I don't want to get a mammogram because I don't want to be treated like a woman. And or that's too distressing. Or if you haven't had your name changed and your license expires and you're like, I have to get my driver's license renewed, but I'm going to have to put my old name on that form. I don't know if I can deal with that.
Yeah. Wow.
And so there are all sorts of issues like that I think it's really important to decouple gender from so many things because it does interfere with people living their lives.
Yeah. And I had a really wonderful talk with a friend who's Black in America, and he said, when he'll speak to white individuals who don't necessarily have compassion for his plight in times, he said to me, something was really sweet. I don't know if I can phrase it properly. He said, they have the luxury of not having to have that as a problem.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So it's really easy not to have to think about it because there's a luxury that they've got not to have to think about it. Right.
Right.
Right. That's the same.
Yeah. And sometimes there's just this presumption that, well, this isn't an issue for me, so it's not an issue for anybody. Which
that's the arrogance in it, right? It's not my problem. Why is it a problem? Not a problem for you. What? That nonsense. Yeah. Well, that's where I'd love to see more compassion increase within society, which is why I want to bring on topics like this, even if it isn't necessarily the topic. I'm like, wow, this is a great thing to discuss for an hour, and it turned out to be a great thing to discuss for the hour.
Yeah, it did. And we went all over the place around the outlines of the topic anyway and talked about what we want to talk about. So.
And for people who didn't catch it the first time, Reinventing Hannah, Jack Ori. I love that you leave the A in there as a capital A. Jack Ori, because it sounds so nice together.
Yeah.
Jack is damn proud of this book. And
pick it up again.
Pick it up so that we can show our viewers. Reinventing Hannah, and we discussed on the last show as well. Thank you for coming. We love you, Jack.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me. And if you go to my website, jackaori.com, you can sign up for my newsletter, which you will get a free copy of my short story, A Boy Like Me, which is about a 10-year-old transgender boy. And you'll also get updates on what I'm doing with my writing and my coaching. You can choose which updates you want so that you won't be inundated with things that you don't care about. But I'd love to connect with people.
And although you are focusing on the parents of transgender kids, you also made clear within this show that you really see that transformation is the point. So yes, apparently, because of my background, there's people that find me suitable for this work, but I'm way beyond that work. That's I find that really sweet as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Nice summary.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank
you love.
We'll figure out another show with you.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Whenever we've got a transpersonal transgender issue, we'll think you've become our transgender specialist. Awesome. although you're no specialist, which is exactly the reason why we have you.
Bye-bye.
Love you.
Bye. Thank you for having me.
That was fun. Yeah. That was really sweet.
I liked how you summarize some parts,
mm-hmm.
because through your words I could feel it better.
Oh, is that right?
And there was a moment where you spoke about the identity.
Yeah.
That was another moment where I was like, Andy, extracted,
Think
music, YouTube, motivational video.
You know what I saw in me? I was very jumpy this show.
Jumpy?
Like I felt a lot of energy. I was like,
Mm.
like there'd be shows where I'm more sitting in myself, and then there's shows when I feel the vibration. And
Yeah, yesterday you were sitting in yourself.
and this today's show is like it's Friday. I haven't eaten well today, or maybe I feel it's Friday date night. I heard Ronnie come in, so I see myself kind of jumping. Yeah, that's okay.
It's Friday night. It's date
Friday
night.
night is date night, and he's gonna get some
Pudding?
fun dinner out with Ronnie. We love you. Thank you for being with us this first
And
week.
we're going to see you on Monday.
And we're
What's
gonna
the
see you-
show?
I have no idea. We're not going to look. We're going to see you Monday
Because he's in a hurry to go to date night.
because I got date night. Love you guys. See you.
Adios.
Bye.